I'm John Chowney with Campbellsville University, welcoming our audience to Dialogue on Public Issues. Today, I'm very pleased to be interviewing a Campbellsville University alum from 1996 class and our recently newly elected member of the Kentucky Court of Appeals from District 3 of the Kentucky Supreme Court District, the Honorable Jacqueline Caldwell. Judge, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your taking time from your busy schedule.
It's been a bit hectic.
No doubt, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here, and I would make the time for this no matter what.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're from nearby?
Well, I grew up in Marion County,
Okay.
From Calvary, which
Okay.
is a little spot in the road, but a wonderful community. And I grew up there. My background is a little non-traditional. I became pregnant in high school and married my high school boyfriend, but I didn't actually finish high school. It's not something I'm proud of, and I don't recommend it, but you can't overcome things.
Right.
I was fortunate to get my GED. I lived here in Campbellsville for quite a while. I worked at Fruit of the Loom for 9 years, sewing
Wow.
T-shirts and
Okay.
driving a forklift the last couple of years. My personal story and why I went back to school, with my young marriage, it was a pretty violent and abusive relationship. I did finally manage to get out of that situation. I went to Bethany House in Somerset,
Okay.
A wonderful resource at the time. I lived in Campbellsville, but that was the nearest shelter. My family was nearby, but I didn't feel comfortable going back there because I did not want to bring that to them. But after staying at Bethany House, I was able to move back home, and of course my family, they were wonderful and supportive of me. But sometime after that, Campbellsville College started a program with Fruit of the Loom where there were some evening classes and a reduced tuition rate. And that's when I started.
Very good.
Right, so I was a 5-year. I didn't graduate in 4 years. I was a 5-year, but I worked full-time at Fruit of the Loom the entire time. So I feel pretty proud of that.
You should be. That is in itself is a compelling story and speaks to your persistence and perseverance.
Well, thank you, yeah.
And you probably crossed paths with our good friend and the late Bobby Himes during that time.
Not only did I cross paths with him, but he was a mentor and a friend like none other. As I know he did for so many.
He did.
I know he did for
literally
so
thousands
many.
of people.
It's amazing because, you really felt like you were the person he was looking out for. Like, how could he have done that for so many and given to them what he gave to me?
And he really was the architect and driving force behind that program at Fruit of the Loom. There were others, and George Wise and Chris Reynolds at Fruit of the Loom and others that were involved, and President Winters.
I don't know
and
that
so
I
forth.
knew that Mr. Himes was.
But he was kind of the cheerleader and campus person who really worked to get that outreach program started, and it was really one of Campbellsville's first adult learner programs, evening programs.
Well, it was a huge success.
Right.
I know several people that I started in class with now who've had full careers. It's my cousin's wife, but she just retired from teaching. We started class at the same time. So, it's certainly been a success. Absolutely, absolutely.
And then you went to law school?
And then I went to law school.
Okay.
I went to U of L. I got a scholarship there, so I couldn't turn it down. And of course, I got that because of my great education here.
Right.
I had a good LSAT score and made pretty good grades here.
Good.
But the professors here, this is a Christian university, but it's not just in the name. I tell that to everyone. I always have. I couldn't have done it without the support I had here. I really couldn't have, and that is the truth.
Yeah.
But certainly Bobby Himes was, I don't know.
It's a part of the legacy of Campbellsville, I think, that's unique. There's so many people like yourself where Campbellsville was there.
Yes.
The opportunity was there,
yes.
And people like Professor Himes and many others.
And many others, absolutely.
Mentored and did the extra work and didn't necessarily even get paid. That wasn't even in their job description to go the
I'm
extra mile
sure.
to work with students like yourself.
Yes, I mean, I was a single mother, you know, and of course I did get a lot of help from my family, thankfully.
Sure, absolutely.
But always, when I could approach any professor here when I was having an issue, and they were creative and supportive. I never felt like, well, you're not the kind of student we want here because you don't have the pedigree we're looking for. Never got that feeling.
Now
they were always appreciative of me being a student.
Right. What prompted you to jump into the race in 2019 for the office of Kentucky Court of Appeals judge?
Well, I've been asked that question a few times, but there are a few things. But of course, the biggest reason of actually taking the plunge is because it was an open seat.
Right.
There wasn't an incumbent. You know, to take on an incumbent in any political race, but particularly in a judicial race, being nonpartisan, you know. It's just a difficult thing to take on an incumbent. So if that's something you ever aspire to do, you almost have to wait till there's an open seat.
Right, right.
And so so there was an open seat. Personally, the thing about appeals work and doing appellate work is it is one of my favorite parts of practicing law. I love it. It's not why I went to law school. It's not something I would. Actually, you know, when I decided to go to law school, it was more about my own personal history, wanting to help people who had been in the situations like I had been in. And certainly I've gotten a lot of satisfaction from that. But I didn't come from a background of attorneys. My family are factory workers and farmers. I had no idea what an appeal was. And then you start practicing and you start, you know, you have a case and you appeal it. And the process of that, it really is the pure practice of law, and I love it. I enjoy it, and I enjoy the work. And so every opportunity I could to be involved in a case where an appeal was appropriate, because obviously they're not in every case, but when an appeal was appropriate, if it were my case and sometimes other attorneys, it's something I love to do. But those two things, my practice and the primary part of my practice being in family law, and then my love of doing appellate work, had kind of come together in the last several years with an issue with just some of the cases, in my opinion at least, taking a little too long there. And particularly these expedited cases involving children. You know, childhood's short. It's brief. You don't get it back. So, you know, and there is a process where those cases are supposed to be expedited, but I had a few where, you know, I don't know the reason why, and I'm not trying to pass any blame here.
Right.
But the frustration really grew. So there's this open seat. I can't imagine that it's not work I will absolutely love, because it's my favorite part of practicing law. And I had a growing frustration that was kind of a driving force. And, you know, and I guess in the last month or two, I've shared it more with a few people, but a calling.
Sure.
I felt a calling.
Certainly.
I needed to do this, and so I did.
We like to hear that here at Campbellsville, and like to hear it from an alum, because that is it's more than a tagline. We speak to prospective students, come to Campbellsville and, quote, find your calling. So we would hope and pray that somewhere along the way, back in the 90s, that Professor Himes and others helped you find your calling.
Absolutely.
And that translated into a decision to become a candidate.
Yes.
Now, that was quite a task, running in a 27 counties, and it's a rather obviously 27 counties and a very diverse district.
Yes, it really.
So how did you go about mounting a campaign in a district like that?
Well, you know, I think before we came on here, I was talking a little bit earlier, sometimes ignorance can be a good thing, because, you know, if I'd known everything that I probably should have known, I probably maybe wouldn't have done it. I would have thought this is impossible. There's no way I can do that. But I didn't know that, and again, I was compelled to file, and so You know, one of the things, and my husband, and I really got to take a second here, you know, that it is a family project. My husband, and we have a 7-year-old daughter.
Oh, wonderful,
yes.
wonderful.
And then, of course, I have my grown daughter. He's 34 now. But, you know, I talked about it with him. I said, you know, if I do this, I feel like I have to do this. But obviously, you all have to be on board because this will be our life.
Sure.
You know, this will be our life for the next, you know, 9 or 10 months. And it's asking a lot. So I don't, you know, I can't presume that for you. You all have to decide. But they have never been anything other than 100% behind me and to do the work. But we sat down and talked first. Like, how do you reach voters? And of course, we didn't have a budget.
Right.
We didn't have a lot of money, and we ultimately didn't raise that much money.
Sure.
But you know, what we did have, what he and I both had, you know, is a strong work ethic. We've always had to work, and when it's all you've known, it's not that hard to do. So we kind of made a plan. We of course, you have the resources of the internet today, but trying to find every single festival and event. And of course, I am not a big fan of Facebook, but I probably couldn't have managed it without that as well. I made a page in February of 2019, and so I'm still learning. I just always like to say that. Sometimes I miss messages and I don't see things because I still really don't know how to use it. But I've gotten better.
Don't feel bad, but
it's, you know, but people would post the smaller events that we would get to. It's because you know, you can't. They're not online somewhere to research and find, but people would post them, you know, like the pancake breakfast for a local firefighter or Masonic Lodge. And for us, for me, those are the places where I felt like I got my votes because any place where I could really talk to people about why I was running, it was effective for me.
Right. Truly a grassroots campaign.
Truly.
And what our audience may not fully realize is that a judicial race is much more restricted politically.
Yes.
You can't attack. You can't raise. Not suggesting you would. You can't talk about partisan issues.
Right.
You really can't talk issues as such.
You cannot.
You can't discuss what you would do on a particular case.
No, and you know, and they're nonpartisan. So you can be a part, but you can't affiliate with that party for purposes of running.
Right.
But that is a good thing.
Right.
It really is because
it
we
is
are all
refreshing.
It is, and because everyone, if you have to be in the court system, it's not just about the judge being impartial, but it's about the person appearing in court. They're entitled to have a feeling of they are being heard by someone who is impartial. So that is important, but it does make it difficult, but at times maybe a little easier because not that you still don't get asked some really tough questions, and you have to be prepared for those.
And this district runs all the way from Taylor, Marion, Nelson County, kind of on the west over to all the way to the east. to
So
please.
So I grew up in Marion County, but I live in Nelson County now. We've lived there 11 years, so it's the top northwestern part, but it's west all the way to Metcalfe County and Monroe County.
Right.
And then it's east all the way to Bell County, Clay County, and Leslie County.
Yeah.
And then there's a little hook, and then it's back east again to Estill, Lee, and Jackson County. So this is interesting. Maybe you don't think it's interesting, but I do, talking about the diversity of the district. So in our state, you know, there are 4 area codes. Well, there are counties that represent each of those area codes and their phone numbers.
Right.
We have 6 congressional members of Congress.
Right.
4 of them, there have counties in this district.
Right.
And there was something else that it's like, I can't even remember now. Oh, and of course, both time zones. There we go. There's 2 time zones, and they're both represented by this district.
Exactly.
And it is, it's expansive, but it really is
Beautiful
the heart
territory.
of Kentucky.
Some of Kentucky's most beautiful areas.
Beautiful.
And wonderful people. I'm very familiar with all the areas and have traveled in them and have friends and contacts in all those areas and have lived most of my life in that. Well, I have lived all my life in that area.
Is that right?
It's wonderful.
Well, I mostly have too, but it is. It is wonderful, and it was such an opportunity for me and for our daughter to see
Sure.
part of the state that, you would get to some of these places occasionally, but I've never been to Leslie County in my life.
Yeah.
It is beautiful. I've told this a couple of times, but I can't get over it. It is one of the most profound things I've ever seen. But there is a memorial there, about 2 miles out of town, to the Hurricane Creek mine disaster. I think it was in 1970. I believe it was like 32 miners, a whole blast. But it is one of the most compelling memorials I've ever seen. It's beautiful. It's so well done. You cannot be at that memorial and not feel the loss of that community.
Certainly.
And there were other things like that I saw, but that still is probably one of the most profound
Now,
things I saw on the trail.
How does the Court of Appeals operate? You represent a district, but you don't just function in that district.
No, I'm so glad you asked that question, because most people are really, if you're not a lawyer, you're not familiar with appeals, and even some lawyers, if they don't do it,
Right.
you're not really familiar with that. So our state is divided into 7 judicial districts for purposes of electing Court of Appeals judges and Supreme Court justices. So in each of these 7 districts, there's 2 Court of Appeals judges and a Supreme Court justice. However, when cases are heard, when they go to the Court of Appeals, they're actually assigned to a randomly selected 3-judge panel from any of those 14 judges. So where you are elected as a judge has nothing to do with the cases you will hear.
Okay.
And where the case originates from has nothing to do with the
Do
judge it's
you
assigned to.
travel to a particular location to hear the appeal, or
Well,
how does that work?
That's also something a lot of people probably do not know, but most appellate work is done by written brief.
Okay.
You
So you don't actually hear presentations by attorneys.
Well, you do.
Okay.
In
okay.
cases where oral argument is granted,
Okay.
and that's what it's oral argument by the attorneys, but it's not, there's no new evidence or
Right.
no new
Okay.
trials or hearings. But when oral argument is granted, then the attorneys do argue that case. Now, with the Court of Appeals, it does have its own courtroom in Frankfort, but it also will routinely travel around the state to hear those cases.
Okay. So you receive written appeal first,
Yes.
and then decide whether you need to hear oral.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you render, the 3 judges render a decision,
Yes.
and then the losing side may, in some cases, appeal further.
They can. So with the Court of Appeals in Kentucky, you have one. It's a right to an appeal. You get
Okay.
to, and it's a right. So the Court of Appeals really can't say, well, we're not going to hear your appeal. They
Okay.
have to hear it. However, the Supreme Court, except for in a select few cases, they are a discretionary Court of Appeals.
Right.
So they can either let the Court of Appeals ruling stand, or if the person who didn't prevail at the Court of Appeals wants to file a motion, it's called a motion for discretionary review to the Supreme Court. And they can take that case and hear it, or they don't have to, and they can let the Court
So
of Appeals opinion stand.
if a defendant has a case in Taylor Circuit Court to localize it, and they and they lose, they're found guilty, let's say,
Okay.
they can automatically appeal to Kentucky Court of Appeals.
That's correct. Now, in the Supreme Court, and cases involving, if you're talking about criminal cases involving the death penalty, or life sentences, 20 years or more. Now, those automatically go to the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court.
Right.
Okay.
But otherwise, then the Court of Appeals is the intermediate appellate court.
Okay.
And for all of your general civil cases and your family law cases involving custody and termination of parental rights, those also go to the Court of Appeals.
Okay. You would not receive anything from district court.
Typically not. Now,
Okay.
district court appeals to circuit court. However, so in those cases, then the Court of Appeals is the discretionary court. The Court of Appeals can take up an appeal from the party who didn't prevail in circuit court on the appeal if they can motion the Court of Appeals to hear their action.
How long is your term?
So this term, because it was an unexpired
Right.
term, this office will be on the ballot again in 2022. But typically they are 8-year terms.
Okay. You're filling the unexpired term that Justice Lambert,
Now,
Deborah Lambert, now in the
that's
state
correct.
Supreme Court.
Right,
Okay.
right. Justice Lambert, she ran and won this race in 2014, and then our Supreme Court Justice Daniel Venters retired or announced his retirement in 2018. So she ran for that seat and won, which left this seat open.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Right.
She's well known here,
Oh,
highly regarded.
Yes, she's
And,
fantastic, and she has been, even though she's at the Supreme Court, she has been so welcoming to me. She is really, I can't say enough good things.
Very, very fine person.
Absolutely.
And public servant.
Yes.
And I would think would be an excellent mentor to whomever was in this position.
Yes, I feel like that's certainly what she's trying to do, and it has been a blessing for me.
Is there a term limit on Court of Appeals judges?
There are no term limits.
Okay.
Not in Kentucky.
So you would run in 2022 for an 8-year term.
Then it would be an 8-year term.
And someone could file
Yes.
to run in 2022 if they
could.
so chose.
They could, yes.
As I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not trying to put words
No,
in your mouth.
you have a lot of knowledge here, so that's good.
If 3 people file, then there's a primary.
That's correct.
A nonpartisan primary in May
Yes.
of that year.
Yes.
So you could potentially run a candidate for the Supreme Court or Court of Appeals, in your case, could have to run 2 races.
Right.
A primary race if there
Right.
are 3 candidates or more,
Yes.
and then a general election campaign.
That's correct. And the way that works then is the top 2 vote getters or 4 or 5 candidates even.
Right,
Yes.
right. Now, what are the restrictions on what you can say and do in a campaign, judicial campaign?
Well,
in general
in
terms.
in general, and you alluded to it earlier, but because you don't know what cases you're going to hear, you really can't comment on things that you may have to decide on. For any judge at any level, you cannot prejudge a case. You have to hear the evidence, you have to hear the arguments, you've got to apply the law. So if you've already made up your mind, then you've essentially disqualified yourself before you've even ran. So the campaign laws for judges are a little bit different, and we have the judicial code of judicial conduct to follow. Candidates, once they've filed, also are subject to that same judicial code of conduct, and that is, you're not to bring dishonor or I can't quote it off the top of my head, but you don't talk badly about your opponents or about the judiciary. You don't say bad things, and you don't prejudge any issues. And so really it makes talking about issues and what your stand, I can't say, well, here's my stand, because then I've already made up my mind. And well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting. I've observed some candidates in recent years for state at this level and the state Supreme Court, and then in other states even more where the laws are different, go right to the edge.
Yes, I think that
close to the edge, it seems to me, in that regard. I won't call any names, but candidates that go on Facebook and talk about immigration issues, appealing to certain stands one way or the other on immigration and sanctuary cities and so forth. And of course, their argument is that's a federal issue, so I can discuss it. But it seems to me that's getting very, very close to, if not already over there.
Right.
I think you can make a case it's already over the edge.
And while maybe technically at the end of the day you have not said what you would do in a particular case, certainly I think certainly the spirit of the law I think has been violated.
Is it Judge, is it kosher, for lack of a better term, to discuss one's judicial ideology, one's judicial philosophy?
I think it is.
Okay.
Yes.
We hear, particularly at the federal level.
Particularly at the federal level.
That's very common in the questioning of federal judges.
Yes.
And I think that's
fair.
I think that's
they
a
are
fair
lifetime appointments.
Are you a legalist? An originalist?
Originalist. Yes.
Or not? And we won't get into what that means necessarily, but. At the state level, I'm beginning to hear that a little more. That kind of debate.
Yes. Well, and when this seat came open, I did apply for the appointment. I didn't get it. And quick aside here, but the gentleman who received the appointment, Jonathan Spalding, he's also a Campbellsville university graduate, and so I was a year behind him here and a year behind him at U of L. So I felt like that was a good omen for me. But one of the questions in that interview process was, what is your judicial philosophy? So certainly, I think it is certainly coming up more in state elections. I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that's, you know.
And it would seem to me, particularly at the Supreme Court level.
Yes.
I mean, appellate level as well.
Right,
but particularly in the Western Kentucky district, between the two candidates there, it was a particularly on the table issue, very evident
Certainly
in advertising and so forth. Between the two candidates, it seemed to me they were trying to outdo each other. No offense to either, and I know one of them is a good friend of mine, but it seemed that they were trying to outdo each other as to who was the most originalist, maybe. That may be a fair representation of what they were saying, but that was my impression. I don't expect any comment from you on that particular thing. But what do you hope to be your legacy when you leave the court?
Well, I hope to, quite frankly, and not to be disparaging in any way, or to imply anything bad about the Court of Appeals now, but I hope to bring a strong work ethic, you know, just a diligence of dealing with cases that not necessarily will make headlines, that are not necessarily the ones that are going to, you know, make my star brighter, but the ones that really affect everyday people. That's what I saw as a practitioner, and how waiting on opinions sometimes for such a long time really impacted people. And ultimately, I mean, I understand these opinions are very important.
Sure.
They not only affect the case that's before the court, but they set law, they set precedent. They can, and so certainly reflection and time to make sure that the right decisions are made is very important. But there also has to be some degree of efficiency to ensure people can continue to move forward with their lives. The wheels of justice move slowly. That's not a new thing, but they should revolve at least in a time where people can continue to live their life.
But it is a premise of our system of jurisprudence that a person should get justice within a timely matter, and not. It seems that sometimes cases just drag on and drag on.
It does, and I know that I don't hold all the answers there, and certainly I'm not going to go in and try and push my way in and say, oh, here's what we've got to do now, because I don't know that yet. Certainly I'm going to just sit with my mouth quiet a little while and work hard and observe, but I would really hope to bring a level of commitment to timeliness and efficiency and just diligence and hard work, common sense and a good work ethic. I think those are not bad things to strive for, even if they aren't glowing.
Thank you so much. We're out of time.
Oh my gosh, that went so fast.
It did. We'll have to do it again.
Yes.
We'll schedule again sometime in a year or so.
Yeah.
Thank you for being my guest. This is John Chowning for Dialogue on Public Issues with recently elected and new member of the Kentucky Court of Appeals, Jacqueline Caldwell. We wish her the very best and thank our audience for watching Dialogue on Public Issues.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.